Welcome everyone to the first of the Missouri River Bird Observatory's fall webinars. So good evening. For new folks that we haven't worked with before, my name is Dana Ripper. I'm coming to you live from Saline County, Missouri, here in mid-Mo. I'm a wildlife biologist and co-founded the Missouri River Bird Observatory with Ethan Duke, who is also on here tonight, in 2010, so a little over 10 years ago. These are the places in the United States and a little bit in Canada where I have worked as a wildlife ecologist over various projects over various years. And in terms of the discussion that we're having tonight, probably this one up here in Prudhoe Bay, Alaska, and down here in Southwest Louisiana are the locations that are probably most relevant to tonight's discussion, because I was able to see some of the material extraction and plastic production activities firsthand in those locations. So again, I'm with the Missouri River Bird Observatory. We are for conservation via science, education, and advocacy. As our name implies, we are somewhat bird focused, but we also work with other wildlife and their habitats as well. So tonight, MRBO is coming to you as a partner organization with Break Free from Plastic. And I personally am coming to you as a volunteer speaker with the Beyond Plastics Speakers Bureau. And I'll tell you just a little bit about both those organizations as well, because they're great to work with. So why is a ornithologist, wildlife biologist super concerned about plastic? And this is one reason. This is something that we're seeing more and more of. These are albatrosses, and we're finding plastic, as most of the folks on this webinar probably know, all over, including on uninhabited outlying islands. We're seeing more and more scenes like these, where our wildlife are ingesting non-biodegradable plastic bits, and it is causing death in both adults and the young to which they are fed. So this is sort of the genesis of my involvement, although I have learned a lot in terms of the environmental impacts of plastics, and I'm going to briefly go into those before sharing some positive news tonight. So let's talk a little bit about this. And I wanted to be clear from the outset that we're really talking largely in terms of the problematic nature of these products. We're really talking mostly about single-use plastics, ones that are used one time and then discarded. So I'm going to touch a little bit on the production and materials, a little bit, tiny bit on the human health aspect, and we have another opportunity coming up in regards to that. And then sort of the overall question is, what do we do with this thing that does not naturally decompose in the environment? It does not biodegrade on its own. And then we'll talk a little bit about the solutions. So this is something that some folks may remember, or they may have seen images. We didn't always have plastic with us. The first plastic, as we know it, was developed in 1906. And then the chemistry of plastic polymers didn't really super take off until just after World War II. And in the 20s and 30s, petroleum became one of the building blocks, a key component in plastic polymers. So this is an advertisement from Life magazine in a 1955 issue, and it's a celebration of the throwaway society, of throwaway living. So for the sake of time and convenience, we're going to have all of these different products that you can use them once and throw them away. I mean, that really is their purpose. So a major problem with that is that plastics, as we all know, are really made to be pretty indestructible. They do break down, but only into smaller components. They do not go back to the soil in any way without major help from us that also has sort of damaging activities. And we'll talk just really briefly about that as well. But we've proliferated this single-use material in various forms, and that was once celebrated. And I like to think that they didn't really know what was going to happen, I hope. Because here we are in 2021, And this is the type of scene that we're seeing more and more and more often. So folks in 1955 probably did not predict this, right? But we do know today about the plastic pollution problem, how it's ending up in our landscapes and oceans, and what we should and can be doing about that from a conservation standpoint. So today, almost half of plastic that is produced is single use, typically plastic packaging. So you'll hear the word petrochemical a lot, right? Petro and chemical. Plastics are made from chemicals and fossil fuels. As I mentioned earlier, petroleum was a key component previously. Today, a lot of plastic is made from a byproduct of hydrofracking, which is ethane. And here's this is not to scale with the house and the gas well, just so you all know, but a very basic graphic of hydrofracking, also known as fracking. So water is pushed down in order to push the products that we want, which are shale oil and gas, up through fractures in the rock, basically getting us to the products that we want. It has several byproducts, one of which is the ethane gas that you see here. In this particular picture, it's being vented, not captured. So a problem with this is that ethane, is one of the major building blocks at this point for our single-use plastic packaging that's being produced. Ethane goes to plants that are kind of admirably called cracker plants because the purpose of those is to crack the ethane molecule and make it into ethylene, which then becomes a building block for a lot of our plastics. What you see here, the person on the left-hand side holding are a bunch of things called nurdles. Those are small plastics that then either get used as they are or get melted into more and more products. The picture that you see on the right is something that you all might remember from earlier this year. That's a cargo ship that burned and sank off the coast of Sri Lanka. And that ship, amongst other toxic cargo, dropped millions of tons of these plastic nurdles made of ethylene, cracked from ethane, into the ocean, and they were washing up on shore there. So at this time, when there's a lot of discussion about moving away from fossil fuels for our energy use in various sectors, whether that's home electricity, whether that's electric vehicles, etc. One of the major uses of our fracking products, such as ethane, is to create plastics, especially single-use plastics. And so at this time, there's more than 300 plastic facilities being proposed just in the US, and then you can see overseas as well. So this is not something that's hidden or conjectured. The American Chemistry Council and its colleagues in the petrochemical industries that work together to make our plastics do see a competitive economic advantage in making more and more plastic. So right now, almost 50 of the ethane cracker plants that I mentioned are in permitting. These are in Pennsylvania, Texas, Louisiana, and Ohio. And as they promote this plan, by 2050, it is expected that plastic manufacturing will triple. And so as a conservationist, I see this as a problem both from a greenhouse gas emissions angle and also from a pollution angle. So this is just a view of an ethane cracker plant under construction in Pennsylvania. So this particular plant is permitted by the EPA and USDA to produce 2.2 million tons of carbon dioxide a year. That's under their permit. And so we kind of know just from even conservative industry estimates what type of greenhouse gases we're talking about. And so if the expansion occurs as planned, we will have in plastic manufacturing facilities the equivalent of almost 300 coal-fired plants by 2050. Does anyone know how many coal-fired plants we actually have right now? Because I didn't know that, so I didn't know what the comparison was. Right now we have around 240 coal-fired plants. So plastic production facilities would produce the greenhouse gas and particulate matter equivalent of more than double of what we already have. So this is concerning from a climate change perspective, amongst other things. And so this is something that is obviously getting more and more attention. I'm sure folks on here saw the International Panel on Climate Change report that came out about a month ago that was well publicized and spoken of. And you can see here, obviously, this is an iconic picture from Australia from the large fires a couple of years ago. And this is Puerto Rico after Hurricane Maria. And this is not just happening, in other places. This is here in Missouri, in Holt County, at a time of the year that we don't usually have extreme weather events. So this is becoming more and more of concern. Briefly, from the human health perspective, microplastics, I'm sure a lot of folks on here have heard of these and have heard them talked about a lot recently. The latest research that's coming out, basically, we are either eating or breathing because microplastics can be so small as to be in air. Almost a credit card worth of plastic every week we are ingesting, either by eating or breathing the particulate matter. Seafood that is eaten whole, as you can see here, is of particular concern as far as food, because a lot of this is in our oceans. Here's just a stat. You can imagine in a bottle of water that's made of plastic with the little twisty, bits that come off when you twist the cap off and it goes crack, right? This didn't, seem super surprising, but there are microplastics in our tap water already, but there are even more in bottled water, of course. And so lots of information like this coming out, including about reproductive health as well, and how microplastics are probably able to cross the placental barrier. Here's a pretty iconic picture of a tiny, tiny microplastic that's in a snowflake. This is obviously a macro lens photographer that got this. And we are lucky enough to be having a microplastics researcher from Utah State University that is joining us in a couple weeks to really get into this topic if you're interested. It's a big topic with a lot of emerging research, and I believe that Ethan is going to
it's
put
in the
that
chat.
in the chat. Well, thank you. Thank you. Okay. So we keep making more and more and more and more and more and more and more of something that does not go away. And if we were going to be able to recycle this out of existence, out of being a problem, we probably would have already done it, right? We'd already be doing it. This is an advertising campaign that folks on here may have seen. It was just a little bit before me, but it's been one of those things that I've kind of seen in the background my whole life. The Crying Indian, and it was part of it was a television commercial where someone threw a bag of, I guess, food refuse, etc., out of a car, and at the feet of someone who is actually an Italian actor, but dressed to appear as a Native American. Very compelling advertisement about how we should not trash America, keep America beautiful. So this was, I believe, 1971, early 70s. So this was sort of the advent of this problem of waste and what to do with waste, especially non-biodegradable waste, sort of having it shift to the consumer. And while I am very, very glad that people are not typically throwing things out of car windows anymore, that is, definitely shifted societally and culturally. We still have a massive waste problem. And I know that I would think if you're on this webinar, you've probably already been trying to do something about it, and possibly for a really long time. And so I bring this up because we have been told for many decades that if we just recycle and if we as consumers, really try to use less plastic, that this isn't going to be a problem. But this is what's happening. These are the stats. More than 11 million tons of plastics enter the ocean every year. A little bit of that comes from illegal dumping, but the vast majority of it comes from litter and waste, essentially escaping our waste stream management systems, going down storm drains, ending up in rivers, and you'll definitely see pictures of that in a little bit, and ending up in the ocean. And so this wouldn't be happening if we could recycle it all. One thing that I was extremely sad to hear, having been a prolific recycler for a very long time, was that really only about 8.5% of plastic has been recycled and is recycled. And the proliferation of plastic is increasing exponentially. So at one point I was like, am I kind of crazy? Because I feel like there's a lot more plastic than there was when I was a kid, in the 80s and 90s, and even later as an adult in the 2000s. I feel like there's a lot more. I mean, I feel like a lot more products come in plastic than used to. And it turns out that, if you've been thinking that too, that is an accurate observation. So of all the plastic that's ever been made, and we really started getting into it right after World War II, half of it's been made since 2005. So it has already ramped up. And as I explained earlier, the plan is to ramp it up some more. Another thing that I was surprised to learn is that these chasing arrows don't really mean the thing can be recycled. Or if it can, it's only in a very, very, very few places in a very specialized setting. So of those 1 through 7 that we all have, that we all, encounter, really only 1 and 2 are typically taken. Sometimes some municipalities will take 5. Recycling is a commodities market, and it fluctuates accordingly because of the fracking boom and the associated ethane boom that came with it. Virgin plastic, quote unquote, is very, very cheap to make. So there's not a lot of incentive to be recycling plastics at this point. The other numbers from 3 to 7 are including something like polystyrene, which we often know by its by the brand name styrofoam, but polystyrene are almost never recycled. The percentages of plastics 1 and 2 that get recycled of all the plastic that is produced are about 30%. So they're better than the other categories, but still recycling is not as successful as we all wished it would be. So as we have a couple webinars in the chat, I believe, I can't see it, for microplastics, and I think Ethan put one in there as well for
chasing arrows.
Thank you. The connection with climate change. These are solutions to our plastic waste problem that would bear their own webinar. My understanding is that chemical recycling is still being discussed. There may be innovation that is helpful and useful, but so far it is not working very well. And incineration, as you can just imagine, if you have ever smelled burning plastic, is probably not going to be the greatest solution either. So this is becoming a fairly iconic graphic cartoon itself. So if you came home and your bathtub tap was running and running and you had water all over your house, would you start bailing water? Would that be the first thing that you would do? Or would you turn off the tap first before you started bailing the water? So really the solution, we really need to reduce our single-use plastic production. I'm not being anti all plastic. There's some extremely important medical uses. Another example that I've heard is that, some plastics go on car bumpers and other parts of cars that make them a lot lighter and therefore a lot more aerodynamic and a lot less gas consumptive. So some good examples. But as far as single-use plastic packaging is concerned, I think we all can see that we probably need to turn it off at the source. So some solutions, and these are things you may have heard of some of them or all of them. It is really tough as an individual consumer. Please don't think that I'm suggesting that we don't do anything in our daily lives. I'm not suggesting that at all. But we kind of have a deck that's stacked against us as individuals. And so I want to talk about a few other solutions other than us doing what we're probably already doing to help be the change. So the concept of extended producer responsibility. And this is something, pardon me, that's starting to certainly become more common in Europe. And my understanding is that Maine has just passed some legislation in this regard, and also Oregon is about to pass them as well. So basically, the folks that are producing all the plastic have some financial responsibility for the waste disposal. So if you think about our waste stream, our disposal streams now, it is essentially that municipalities, possibly counties, possibly subdivisions, but largely municipalities and counties are responsible for the costs of all of this. And if consumers don't really have much of a choice of the packaging, then municipalities don't really have much of a choice of what they're going to do with the waste stream, and it can be very expensive. So one of the ways that's been suggested is that producers help bear the financial cost of their products and the end of their life. And so one of the many ways in which this is kind of manifesting is something like this. And I'm just giving you all this as just an example that I thought was really neat. It is helping the food service industry, which, as you can imagine, is a source of much disposable product use. It is giving the food service industry a way to assess and purchase from producers that basically share their values and or financial incentives for producing less waste. So this is just one example. It is really, really neat. It is incredibly elaborate. I cannot imagine the amount of time that went into it, but you can see all the different categories that they've assessed, and what this helps someone that owns a restaurant or a hospital or cafeteria supply company are the folks that would use this. You can imagine all the different things that they need to take into account, and those have been taken into account in this platform. I did want to, this was made by a collaborative that included industry representatives for the producers of these products as well. So a really neat new partnership. So here's some national legislation. And I think we do have a link to more information on this, but the Break Free from Plastic Pollution Act.
In there.
Thank you. I'm really hopeful about this. It's the second time it's been introduced in US Congress. I'm not going to go through all of this, but it is pretty heavy legislation addressing a problem that is already real bad and probably going to get worse. So as a wildlife conservationist and environmental quality conservationist, I am for aggressive action on plastic pollution, and this is fairly aggressive. One of the things about it is, a nationwide beverage container refund program. I remember returnable bottles, right? Those things kind of died out slowly. So there are things like that. There's some, really positive incentive type programs associated with this legislation. One of the things, though, is that it pauses new plastic facilities, those more than 300 that are proposed that I spoke of, that could be, as well as creating a lot of new plastic pollution in terms of single-use plastic packaging, also a lot of greenhouse gas emissions as well. So it would pause those while they undergo a review. This is an example. This has nothing to do with that legislation. There was a forced pause on a Formosa plastics plant in Louisiana. And it was because the folks that live around the proposed enormous facility, they made their voices heard. And this is a very rare occurrence, to be straightforward, that a group of citizens would stop such a large and wealthy construction project. But so far it has been paused, at least. So this refers to the plastic trifecta. So there are a number of states that have banned certain plastic products, and it's typically one or all three of these plastic products right here. So the plastic shopping bags that are used for an average of 12 minutes and then in the environment for 500 years, plastic straws, and there have been some exemptions in some states for disabled folks who do genuinely need a drinking straw, but that would be the only exception. And then polystyrene, aka the brand name Styrofoam, largely because of it can easily be replaced by a number of different containers. So the Beyond Plastics, which later on, I think Eva is going to drop their website in the chat, there is some legislation language on their websites that addresses the plastic trifecta and serves as an example for folks who would like to work on banning these items in their municipality or county or even state. So here in Missouri, we currently have a law on the books that no one can ban plastic bags. So we have a ban on bans for plastic bags. Each year in the Missouri legislature for the last couple of years, that has been proposed to be expanded to all kinds of plastic material and other materials, actually. But the ban on bans would include straws and polystyrene and other plastic utensils, etc. And so far in the last couple of legislative sessions here in Missouri, that expansion on this preemptive law has not passed, but it is proposed each year. And so, I mean, from my perspective, I would hope that municipalities that bear the brunt of the both logistic and financial waste stream management should have the ability to be able to say, you know, that they don't want to deal with these things. So that's just from sort of an economic and local political perspective. But obviously from an environmental perspective, I don't think that we need these things. They're not really necessary and they're very, very harmful. Okay, so up to the brand audit that we wanted to tell you all about, which is something that we of MRBO just did with our friends Missouri Relief and a lot of volunteers from Missouri Master Naturalists and other individuals just did in Waverly, Missouri. So plastic brand audits, there are a number of different organizations that do them and to which you can submit data. But you can see here, Break Free from Plastic. They're an organization that really compiles the data from plastic audits around the globe and puts them into a report each year and analyzes the data to determine which producers are having their products end up in the environment the most. So essentially, it is a measure of the proliferation of those entities' plastic waste. So we wanted to submit data to Break Free from Plastics brand audit for 2021, and we did so. So one of the purposes is to say to producers, this is your, you know, you're producing this is your waste. Some audits actually even collect all the waste from one particular corporation and mail it to them so that it ends up on the doorstep of their corporate headquarters. We were not logistically able to do that this year during our first brand audit. But in any case, this is the point. Sort of, I mean, honestly, sort of a shaming campaign, but really to get folks to change so that this is not such an enormous problem. I don't know about you all, but I remember getting a lot of Coca-Cola in aluminum cans, which are very recyclable and for which there is a good market for recycling. So this is done all over the world. This is a picture of one done in Indonesia. Here's some of the results. So the 10 most prolific plastic producing companies, and you can see that, you know, again, the petrochemical words, right? So we have, you know, some of these are familiar to me, some of them are not familiar to me, but ExxonMobil sure is, and Dow. And then these are, you know, some of the parent companies of the brands that we find. And this is the 2020 brand audit, again, data from all over the globe. So here is just some of the trash from one of the days that Missouri River Relief pulled trash out of our Missouri River during their event, multi-day event called the Big Money Clean Sweep. We were in no way able to audit even all of the trash, even with, there were 11 of us working for 6 hours, and we weren't able to finish all of the trash that Missouri River Relief folks had collected in one day on a couple mile stretch of the Missouri River. So that kind of gives you an idea probably of how much trash our friends are having to pull out of the Missouri River. So much thanks to the volunteers. As you all can imagine, this was not the most pleasant activity that one could ever do. But you can see that we would separate things into different types of materials, right? Bottles, you know, food packaging, lots and lots and lots and lots of styrofoam. So one thing to bring your attention to is you can see really a lot of these bottles, they don't have a brand, right? And a lot of these styrofoam bits don't have a brand. And so while we were certainly able to, and I'm going to show you the results, identify, you know, several hundred different products, a lot of it sort of breaks apart in the river. The labels are lost. I'm not sure that's not purposeful, honestly. And then, you know, we've got a lot of styrofoam breaking up, and eventually it breaks up more and more and more until those microplastics that I spoke of a little bit ago. So here are the types of items. Because of the way plastic bags and straws act in a river setting, we found less of those than one would expect. But you can imagine bottles are floating, and the Missouri River Relief folks are able to get them near the shore. So bottles, bottle caps, all this polystyrene cups, et cetera, all the way down. And these, we had hundreds and hundreds of items and categories. I think the data sheet had like 250 lines on it. But these are the top 9 or 10 here. And so similar to kind of the rest of the global audit, our first couple were, you know, very well known. Walmart, this was almost entirely due to the great value water bottles with which we are all familiar. This is, and I'll show you, I believe, in the next slide. That is actually, we would know it as Sonic. This is the parent company. So some of these are parent companies of alcohol brands. So there we go. So there's more of those are like the parent companies, and here are the brands, which are all going to be very familiar to you. So, I mean, there was definitely some regional influence, right? Like Sonic and QT are takeout places that are very popular in Missouri and in our surrounding states. Some of this New Amsterdam vodka I had never heard of. There was a lot of that out there. Fireball, etc. So okay, so this is about the end. I wanted to try and keep it about 40 minutes, but just some things that you can do if you're interested in this topic, of course. So just speak with other people about it. I think it's becoming more and more certainly noticeable, but noticed as well. And I I think that in this day and age when there's a lot of controversial things that we seem to like to fight over, nobody likes this, right? Nobody likes plastic pollution. Nobody wants to see that in the world. And so it's something that we can agree on and do positive things about together. You can talk to store managers, right? That's a place where a lot of influence could be had in a larger way. So you can talk to your own reps at our state level about that ban on plastic bag bans, and just kind of let them know that you're interested in seeing less plastic pollution and better waste management instead of more plastic pollution and worse waste management. Support that Break Free from Plastic Pollution Act. If you have not already, the movie The Story of Plastic is incredibly informative, and it gives a much better sort of global perspective about this entire story and about how waste is managed and about how places end up looking like this. So you can start your own plastic brand audit, or join one. We're certainly going to do more in the future. Hopefully Missouri River Relief will hook us up with their trash again. A new organization that it was new to me. I shouldn't say it's new. Nurdle Patrol, kind of a funny sounding name, but those little plastic nurdles that are building blocks for other things, or are the innards for things like Beanie Babies, right? Think of that. Think of the little plastic balls. You can join as a community scientist, where you are collecting data on nurdles on stream banks and lake shores and the like. So really neat project. I haven't done it yet. I absolutely intend to. It looks like something that's pretty easy to do, and it too goes into a much larger nationwide database, and so your data would really help that effort. Empower yourself with info, and I'm gonna plug a class here on my last slide. But and use less plastic, right? That's not obviously that's not really my entire message by any stretch. Things have gotten a little out of control, right? I think we've all seen this sort of section. These are cut up fruits and vegetables in plastic. With few exceptions, there are exceptions, but with few, we can probably all cut up our own fruits and vegetables and not buy them in plastic, right? But you can see there's a much bigger picture that us as individuals can only do so much unless we get together. So this is a class that occurs a couple times a year. I'm actually taking it for the second time because it's incredibly interesting. It's in Bennington, at Bennington College, which is in Vermont, but it's online. And it's $100 as a student that is auditing it, but it's 8 sessions with an incredibly deep dive into plastic production, policy, waste stream management, you name it. And I highly recommend it. It's incredibly informative. And Eth's going to put that in the chat also, and then just the Beyond Plastics website as well, because there's a ton of really good information on it. So we have time for questions. If
yes, all those links are sprinkled through the chat. Those links will also be sent in a follow-up email, and this recording of this will be posted as well. The only question I've seen so far in the Q&A is one asking about if there's going to be an email link to the recording. That's it.
Yep, absolutely. And let's see, I'm going to stop sharing so I can see the chat as well. I don't even know who's in the audience yet because I can't see anything when I'm sharing. But if there are folks from Missouri River Relief or volunteers and you would like to, we can promote you to panelists so that you can talk if you want to. Just put it in the chat if you would like to speak. Happy to have you.
It's so weird doing it in webinar format because you have to really hunt through the chats and things to see. But,
so Mal of River Relief, of Missouri River Relief, put their link to their website as well. Don't think we have any questions. Hopefully that means everybody's sort of digesting and going to links to more info, because this is a pretty big topic, but I didn't want to keep everyone for hours, and also did not want to go into the more depressing parts of things.
Those links out there really do provide so much good information out there. Really drill down into specifics, and also point in the direction that you're hoping that people will be able to take action on their own and figure out what to do.
I have a hand up from Kathy Borgman. Kathy, I'm gonna hit the allow to talk button.
Well, that's nice of you. I was actually looking for something else and hit that button. But it does, the chats, but it does allow me to say thank you for this, because I think that particular movie about plastic, the one that you promoted before, that really has stuck in my mind a long time. And I think especially seeing all of the trash that we send to other places in the world, and just seeing stacks and stacks of it somewhere. And I know one of my friends said after that, if this isn't getting recycled, then let's at least deal with it in our own landfills and not in the poor places of the world. So that really has affected me thinking about this whole issue, and I appreciate the work you're doing on it, and continue to make us aware of it. And especially I like that idea of the producers of it needing to help take care of how we deal with it. Thank you.
Thanks, Kathy. There's some good comments in the chat too. David Pierce had a comment that is related to what Kathy just said. Fewer recycling drop-off centers. So that is something that the story of plastic gets into. We shipped a lot of our recycling to China, and in 2018, for a variety of reasons, they were like, we're taking almost none of this anymore. So whether or not their recycling was done in an environmentally friendly fashion is very much debatable. However, it did leave us with an incredible glut of plastic that we have had to deal with, and it kind of dropped the bottom out of the recycling market as well. And so that was a major deal. But one can't blame, another country for not taking our castaway materials. Just something we all have to work on. Mel says, from Missouri River Relief, we found over 500 plastic straws in one 2-mile stretch just below Kansas City. I think the plastic bags are usually broken down into tiny pieces or sink in the water, and we don't find much of them on the Missouri River. I think, Mel, that from your trash that day in Waverly, I think we counted like 20 some bags, but it was a lot less than I expected, given that they're blowing all over the place all the time. So that makes sense that they do eventually break apart. Cool. Everyone should, if there's good chats going on in the chat. Okay, everyone. I'm going to make sure the chat saves, because there's some info in there that you all have put in that I'm going to add to the follow-up email as well. I'm not seeing any more questions, so I will kind of let everybody go and get on with their night. And I really appreciate everyone coming to our first webinar of the fall. Please come to the Microplastics webinar in a couple weeks. I'm excited about that. I will learn a lot of things with you.
Thank you,
So, good night,
everybody.
everyone.